AITA for getting my boss fired after she gave me 30 days to resign? The ultimatum arrived on a Friday at 6 in the evening. Meredith Vance, the director of operations, called me to her office when almost everyone had already left for the weekend. The 47th floor of the corporate tower in the Chicago Loop was practically empty. Only the emergency lights and the hum of the air conditioning remained. "Close the door," she said without looking up from her computer. I sat in the chair in front of her desk, the same chair where I had received congratulations for successful projects over the last 4 years, but something in her tone told me that this conversation would be different. "I'm going to be direct with you, Jessica," she finally said, looking at me with that expression of superiority she had perfected over the years. "Your position in this company is no longer viable. I suggest you start looking for other opportunities." "Excuse me. You have 30 days to submit your voluntary resignation. If you don't do it, I will make sure your experience here becomes unsustainable." I stayed silent, processing what I had just heard. It was not a performance review. It was not a formal warning from HR. It was a direct threat. "May I ask why?" Meredith smiled. The kind of smile that does not reach the eyes. "Let's just say your work style no longer aligns with the department's vision. Some people simply don't fit in, and you're one of them." My last review was excellent. The Dallas expansion project exceeded expectations by 20%. Reviews can change, projects can be reassigned. She leaned back in her chair. 30 days, Jessica. Use them wisely." I left her office with my legs shaking, but not from fear, from anger. "My name is Jessica Hayes and I am 38 years old. I am a project manager at one of the largest consulting firms in Chicago, with a presence across the entire country. I arrived at this company 6 years ago, after a decade of working in smaller firms. My professional history was not easy. I started from the bottom, literally from the bottom. My first job was as an administrative assistant at a small construction company in Joliet, Illinois, making minimum wage while studying for my degree at night at the University of Illinois, Chicago. It took me 15 years to get to where I am. 15 years of sacrificing weekends, taking certification courses, accepting the projects nobody wanted, of proving over and over again that I deserved a seat at the table. When I finally arrived at this consulting firm as a junior coordinator, I felt I had achieved something important and kept moving up. I delivered every project assigned to me ahead of schedule and under budget. I developed a reputation for solving impossible problems. My clients specifically asked to work with me. My team had the lowest turnover rate in the department because I believed in developing people, not exploiting them. But 8 months ago something changed. Meredith Vance arrived as the new director of operations, transferred from the Atlanta office with a reputation that preceded her. Efficient, they said, results-oriented, relentless with underperformance. What they did not say was that she was also known for eliminating anyone she perceived as a threat, especially women who could outshine her. From day one, I felt her gaze evaluating me, not as a valuable employee, but as a potential rival who needed to be neutralized. The problem started when the CEO, Mr. David Thompson, publicly congratulated me for the Dallas project at an executive meeting. It was a complicated project, a difficult client who had fired 2 previous consulting firms. We rescued it, delivered it with 20% savings over the original budget, and the client signed a contract extension for 3 more years. Meredith was present at that meeting, and I saw how her expression changed when the CEO said, "Jessica represents exactly the type of leadership we need to develop in this company." That same week, the changes began. I was removed from 3 major projects without explanation. My budget requests began to be systematically rejected. Key meetings were scheduled at times when I had previous commitments with clients. My team was redistributed to other managers, leaving me with the smallest and most problematic projects. I documented everything. Every email, every decision, every pattern. It is a habit I developed years ago when I learned that in the corporate world, memory is not enough. You need evidence. When Meredith gave me the 30-day ultimatum, I already had 8 months of documentation saved in a personal cloud folder, completely separate from the company's servers. The weekend after the ultimatum, I met with my brother Mark at a coffee shop in Lincoln Park. He is a labor lawyer with 15 years of experience. Technically, What she told you constitutes creating a hostile work environment, he explained while reviewing the notes I had brought him. But proving intent is complicated. Companies have the right to reorganize their departments. What if I have documentation of a systematic pattern? Mark looked up. What kind of documentation? I opened my laptop and showed him the folder. Emails where Meredith excluded me from projects without justification. Budget comparisons showing how my requests were rejected, while identical ones from my colleagues were approved. Informal testimonies from coworkers who had witnessed derogatory comments. Meeting minutes where my contributions were systematically ignored or attributed to others. This is quite comprehensive, Mark said after reviewing it for several minutes. I learned a long time ago that words vanish into thin air. Why haven't you reported this to HR? Because the head of human resources is a personal friend of Meredith's. They came here together from Atlanta. Mark nodded slowly. Then you need to go higher. Who's above Meredith? The CEO, Mr. Thompson, but she has direct access to him. Any complaint I submit, she can block or distort before it reaches him. And the board of directors? I thought for a moment. The board met quarterly and generally only reviewed numbers, not internal conflicts. But there was one person in particular who might be interested in my situation. Ms. Eleanor Bishop, I said. She's the independent board member. Before joining the board, she was the director of an auditing firm. She has a reputation for being relentless with corporate governance issues. Can you contact her directly? Not officially, but her daughter Emily works in the finance department. We know each other from the company gym. Mark smiled. You have 30 days. Use them to build a case they can't ignore. The following Monday, I arrived at the office as if nothing had happened. Meredith was probably expecting me to arrive defeated, maybe even with a resignation letter in hand. Instead, I sat at my desk and started working on the projects I had left, no matter how small they were. But I also started working on something else. During the next few days, I discreetly approached colleagues who had been affected by Meredith's decisions, not to complain, but to listen. What I discovered was revealing. I was not the first. In the 8 months since her arrival, Meredith had forced the departure of 4 people. 3 had resigned after being marginalized from their roles. 1 had been fired for poor performance after having all her important projects taken away. The pattern was identical to mine. Gradual exclusion, removal of responsibilities, isolation from the team, and finally direct pressure to resign. I also discovered something Meredith did not want anyone to know. The figures for the southern region don't add up. Sarah Chun, a finance coordinator, confided in me during lunch in the building's food court. Ever since the new director arrived, there are expenses that don't have adequate support. Inflated travel expenses, consulting fees to companies nobody's ever heard of, productivity bonuses for projects that were never completed. How serious are the discrepancies? Sarah looked around to make sure no one was listening. In the last 6 months, I've detected at least $100,000 in expenses that I can't reconcile. And that's only what I can see from my position. There are accounts I don't have access to. Have you reported it to anyone? I mentioned it to HR 3 months ago. It was a mistake. The next day, Meredith moved me to a different department without explanation. I used to report to the CFO. Now I report directly to her. I can't see any expense reports without her knowing. Did she threaten you directly? Not with words, but she made it very clear that my job depended on my discretion. She told me that corporate finances were complicated, and that I didn't have the context to understand certain strategic decisions. And the CFO said nothing? The CFO was the first one she forced to resign after she arrived. Officially, he left for personal reasons, but I was there. I saw how he was marginalized until he had no other option. This was no longer just a story of a hostile work environment. It was something bigger. Meredith was not only eliminating employees who outshone her, she was silencing anyone who could discover what she was really doing with the company's money. That night I did not sleep. I was reviewing my files, looking for anything that could confirm what Sarah had told me. I found small inconsistencies that I had previously ignored, invoices for consulting services I did not remember seeing, travel to cities where we had no active projects, bonuses approved for results that I knew had not been achieved. The pieces were starting to fit together. $200,000 in expenses that did not add up. Shell consulting firms, travel expenses to cities without projects, bonuses for results that never existed. Meredith was not eliminating employees because she disliked them. She was eliminating them because they could uncover the fraud. I thought I was fighting for my job. In reality, I was uncovering a criminal operation. On day 12 of my ultimatum, I managed to get an informal meeting with Emily Bishop, the independent board member's daughter. We met at a coffee shop in River North, far from the office. Emily was young, maybe 27, but she had the same analytical look as her mother. "My mom asked me to hear you out," she said directly, "but I need to understand what this is about before getting her involved." I explained the situation from the beginning, the ultimatum, the behavioral pattern, the other affected people. When I got to the part about the financial irregularities, her expression changed. "Do you have evidence of that?" "I have testimony from people who have noticed discrepancies, but the financial documents are in areas I don't have access to." Emily thought for a moment. "My mom has access to everything as a board member. If there is something irregular, an audit would find it. The problem is requesting an audit without alerting Meredith. She controls the flow of information to the CEO. What if the request came directly from the board? Can your mom do that? If she has sufficient reason to suspect wrongdoing, she can request a special audit without needing management's approval. It's part of her power as an independent board member." I handed her a thumb drive with a copy of all my documentation, 8 months of emails, decisions, and patterns, plus the testimonies I had gathered over the last 2 weeks. "Give me a week," Emily said, putting the drive away. "My mom will want to review this personally." While I waited, Meredith intensified her campaign. On day 15, I was notified that my performance review had been revised and now showed areas for significant improvement. The same projects that had received congratulations from the CEO now appeared with negative observations. Achievements that I had documented with emails from satisfied clients were described as mixed results requiring follow-up. On day 18, they moved my office from a space with a window on the 47th floor, where I had worked for 4 years, to a cubicle without natural light on the 8th floor, next to the server room. The constant noise from the cooling equipment made it almost impossible to concentrate. My coworkers avoided looking at me when they passed by, as if failure were contagious. On day 20, I received a formal warning for supposedly arriving late 3 times in the last month, even though my keycard log showed otherwise. When I requested to see the records supporting the warning, HR told me the system had technical problems, and that my direct supervisor's word was sufficient. On day 22, my access to the project management systems was revoked. The official justification was a reorganization of permissions for IT security. The reality was that I could no longer see any of the projects I had worked on, any of the clients I had developed, or any record of my contributions. On day 24, I was assigned to a new project, reviewing 10-year-old files for an audit process that nobody had requested. It was the corporate equivalent of being sent to count grains of sand, a job designed to humiliate me until I resigned out of dignity. I documented every incident, every email, every decision. Every day, the folder on my personal computer grew. "She's trying to build a case to fire you for cause," Mark explained when I showed him the new documents. "If you resign voluntarily, she doesn't have to pay your full severance. If she fires you for cause, she doesn't have to either. But if she fires you without cause, it's more expensive for the company. She's betting that you'll quit before she has to spend that money. What do I do? You hold on. Don't resign and don't give them any real reasons to fire you. Arrive early, stay late, do everything they ask without complaining. Meanwhile, we wait for the board to act. And if they don't act in time, then we have a very solid case for wrongful termination and a hostile work environment lawsuit. But I'd rather you win inside the company than in a courtroom. Lawsuits take years and leave scars." On day 23, I received a text from Emily. "My mom wants to see you. Tomorrow at 10 in her private office." Ms. Eleanor Bishop received me in an elegant office on Michigan Avenue, far from the company's building. "I've reviewed everything you sent me," she said without beating around the bush. "It is concerning on several levels. Enough to act. The pattern of harassment is clear, but what interests me more are the financial irregularities. I hired a team of external auditors to do a confidential preliminary review. Did they find anything? Ms. Bishop opened a folder. In the last 8 months, approximately $200,000 in expenses do not have adequate support or present significant inconsistencies. Consulting fees to companies that don't exist, travel expenses to cities where there were no projects, bonuses for projects that were not completed as reported. $200,000. The figure left me speechless. Meredith is behind all of this. Most of these expenses were approved directly by her. Some involve the head of HR as well. What's going to happen now? The board has an emergency meeting scheduled for Friday. I am going to present these findings along with your documentation about the work environment. What happens next will depend on how the rest of the board reacts. Friday is day 30, I said, almost to myself. Ms. Bishop looked at me with something resembling respect. It seems you arrived just in time. On Thursday, day 29, Meredith called me to her office again. This time, an HR representative was present, the very same friend she had brought from Atlanta. Jessica, we have reviewed your file and come to the conclusion that your position must be terminated, Meredith announced with barely contained satisfaction. We are offering you a basic severance package if you sign these documents today. I looked at the papers she handed me. It was a voluntary resignation disguised as a mutual agreement. I'm not going to sign that. It's the best option you have. If we terminate you tomorrow for cause, you will receive nothing. For cause based on what? On a retroactively altered review? On attendance logs that contradict the building's security systems? Meredith's expression changed slightly. Be careful what you're insinuating. I'm not insinuating anything. I'm describing facts that are documented. The HR director intervened. Jessica, you're in a very difficult position. I advise you to accept this offer. Thank you for the advice. My answer is still no. I stood up and walked towards the door. Before leaving, I turned around. By the way, Meredith, will you be attending the board meeting tomorrow? Her face visibly paled. What do you know about that meeting? Only that it's scheduled. Have a good evening. I left the office knowing it was probably the last time I would be in that building as an employee, but also knowing I would not be the only one. On Friday, day 30, I arrived at the office early. The atmosphere was strange. There were extra security guards in the lobby. Several executives who normally did not come in on Fridays were present. Something was happening. At 9 in the morning, I received an email from the CEO's assistant. Please report to the executive floor boardroom at 10 o'clock. I went up to the 51st floor without knowing exactly what to expect. The boardroom was occupied by the entire board of directors, the CEO, a team of external lawyers, and to my surprise, 2 auditors from an international firm that I recognized for its reputation. Meredith was sitting in a corner, visibly nervous. Her hand shook slightly when she picked up her glass of water. The head of HR was nowhere to be found. Ms. Hayes, thank you for coming, said the chairman of the board. A 70-year-old man with completely white hair and a reputation for not tolerating nonsense. Please take a seat. I sat in the only available spot, directly across from Meredith. Our eyes met for a moment. In hers I saw fear, true fear, for the first time since I met her. Over the next 2 hours, I witnessed the complete dismantling of Meredith Vance's operation. The auditors presented findings that went beyond what Ms. Bishop had previewed for me. It was not $200,000. It was more than $400,000 over an 8-month period. The fraud was systematic and sophisticated, fake invoices issued by shell companies, consulting fees paid to offshore firms that never delivered any work, productivity bonuses approved for projects that existed only in internal reports, and travel expenses to cities where there was no company activity, including several trips to Miami and Madrid that coincided with Meredith's vacations. The most serious part was the network of complicity. The HR director had been taken into custody that morning at her home by federal agents. There was evidence that she had helped create false documentation to justify the dismissals of people who had questioned the expenses. She had also signed authorizations for bonuses that were never distributed to the employees who supposedly received them. Do you wish to add anything to what has been presented, Ms. Vance? Asked the chairman of the board. Meredith opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Finally, she shook her head. When it was my turn to speak, I presented my documentation on the hostile work environment, the emails where I was excluded from projects, the budget comparisons, the testimonies of affected colleagues, and the timeline of how each person who had questioned anything was systematically marginalized until they resigned. What I want you to understand, I said, looking directly at the board members, is that this was not personal. She didn't attack me because she disliked me. She attacked me because I started asking questions. She attacked the previous CFO because he saw the numbers. She attacked Sarah Chun because she noticed the discrepancies. The pattern is clear. Anyone who could discover the fraud was eliminated. The silence in the room was absolute. Ms. Hayes, said the CEO when I finished, why did you not report this earlier through internal channels? Because the internal channels were controlled by the same people committing the irregularities. The head of HR was an accomplice. Any complaint I filed would have been blocked, distorted, or used against me. I reported it in the only way I could guarantee the information would reach the people it needed to reach. The chairman of the board nodded slowly. You did the right thing, and on behalf of this board, I deeply regret what you have had to face these past months. The company failed you. Meredith did not say a word during the entire session. When the auditors finished their presentation and the lawyers explained the legal implications, she simply stood up and was escorted out of the room by security. Her career at the company was over, but that was not all. The lawyers mentioned that the case would be turned over to the authorities for possible charges of wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. Meredith would not only lose her job, she would likely face a federal indictment. That afternoon, the CEO called me to his office personally. Jessica, I want to apologize on behalf of the company for what you experienced. It should never have gone this far. Thank you, sir. I also want to make you a proposal. With Meredith's departure, the Director of Operations position is vacant. The board has decided that you are the most qualified candidate to fill it. I was speechless for a moment. Your performance on projects speaks for itself, and the way you handled this situation, documenting systematically, seeking the right channels, keeping your cool under pressure, demonstrates exactly the type of leadership we need. I need to think about it. Of course. Take the weekend, but I want you to know that the board is unanimously in favor of this decision. That night, I had dinner with my brother Mark at a restaurant in the West Loop. So, from almost fired to Director of Operations, he said, raising his glass. Not bad for 30 days. 31, I corrected. On day 30, they offered me severance to resign. Today is day 31. Are you going to accept the position? I thought about it for a moment. Yes, but with conditions. I am going to make sure that what happened to me never happens to anyone else. I'm going to create real reporting channels, whistleblower protections, and regular independent audits. Sounds like you're going to do much more than just direct operations. Someone has to do it, and it turns out I now have the power to make it happen. It has been 8 months since that day. The company had to pay significant fines for the discovered irregularities, over $500,000 between tax penalties and settlements. The CEO resigned 3 months later, not out of complicity, but for his failure to detect the fraud under his supervision. The board decided the company needed new leadership to regain the trust of clients and employees. Meredith Vance is facing federal charges for fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. Her trial is set to begin next year. The former HR director reached a plea agreement with the prosecutors in exchange for testifying against her. According to the lawyers, Meredith could face between 8 and 15 years in prison if found guilty. I now occupy the office on the 47th floor where I received the ultimatum. I completely redecorated it, removing any trace of who was there before. Where Meredith had photos of herself with powerful executives, I have photos of my team celebrating completed projects. Where she had an imposing desk designed to intimidate, I have a collaborative work table where I sit at the same level as whoever comes to talk to me. The 4 people Meredith had forced to resign were contacted personally. I explained what had happened and offered them the chance to come back. 2 accepted and returned to the company with better positions and back pay. The other 2 had already rebuilt their careers elsewhere, but received significant compensation for what they had endured. One of them wrote to me later, It's not the money that matters. It's knowing that someone finally acknowledged that what they did to us was wrong. I implemented the changes I promised. There is an anonymous whistleblower hotline that goes directly to the board's audit committee, not to any operational director. There are quarterly workplace environment audits conducted by an external firm. There are real and documented protections for those who report irregularities, including guaranteed anonymity and a strict ban on retaliation. I also changed the department's culture. Performance reviews now require documented evidence, not just a supervisor's opinion. Changes in department or responsibilities must be justified in writing. Any employee can request to see their complete personnel file at any time. Sarah Chan, the finance coordinator who trusted me with her suspicions when no one else dared, was promoted to internal controls manager. Her bravery in speaking up was crucial to the case, and now she is in charge of making sure no one ever manipulates the numbers again without being detected. My brother Mark said something to me last week that made me reflect. Do you know what's most impressive about all this? It's not that you won, it's how you won. You never lost your cool. You never did anything illegal or unethical. You never stooped to her level. You won by being exactly who you've always been. He was right. In those 30 days, Meredith expected me to react emotionally, to resign in indignation, to yell about injustice, to make some mistake that would justify my termination. Instead, I documented, analyzed, looked for allies, and acted only when I had everything I needed. Sometimes I think about that Friday at 6 in the evening, when Meredith told me I had 30 days to resign. She thought she was eliminating a threat. What she did was give me exactly the time I needed to build the case that destroyed her. The irony is perfect. She gave me 30 days to leave, and on day 31, the one who left was her. Some important lessons from this experience. Document everything. Every email, every decision, every important conversation. Memory is not enough in the corporate world. Words vanish, but documents remain. I started documenting by instinct, not knowing I would need it someday. That habit saved me. Know your rights. When I was given the ultimatum, I knew immediately that it was creating a hostile environment. That knowledge gave me power. I did not freeze, wondering if they were right or if I had done something wrong. I knew what they were doing was wrong, and that allowed me to act from a position of clarity instead of confusion. Seek allies. You cannot fight a corrupt system alone. You need to find the right people inside and outside the organization. My brother gave me the legal framework. Emily connected me with her mother. Sarah gave me the financial information. My affected colleagues gave me their testimonies. Each ally contributed something I would not have achieved alone. Patience is a superpower. Meredith expected me to react emotionally, to resign in a fit of rage, or to make mistakes that would justify my termination. Instead, I waited, documented, and acted only when I had everything I needed. Those 30 days she gave me as a threat became my strategic advantage. Do not be afraid to go higher. When normal channels are compromised, look for other paths. There is always someone in an organization who wants to do the right thing. You just have to find them. Ms. Bishop did not know me, but when she saw evidence of fraud and systematic harassment, she acted. Ethical people exist in all organizations. The challenge is reaching them. Fraud and harassment often go hand in hand. This is something I did not understand before this experience. When someone in a position of power systematically attacks competent employees, there is usually something else behind it. No one risks their reputation persecuting subordinates for no reason. If your boss attacks you for no apparent reason, ask yourself what they are trying to hide. And finally, surviving is not enough. When I won, I could have settled for keeping my job and moving forward, but that would have left intact the system that allowed someone like Meredith to exist. That is why I chose to change things from the inside. That is why I implemented protections and reporting channels. That is why I made sure the people who were wronged received justice. Meredith thought she was eliminating a problematic employee. What she did not know was that she was creating the person who would eventually take her place and change the entire department. On day 31, when I saw her being escorted out of the building by security, I did not feel satisfaction. I felt relief, and I also felt a profound sense of responsibility, because now it was my turn to make sure this never happened again. That is the real work. Not just surviving, but changing the system that allowed this to occur. And that is what I am doing now, changing things from the inside, one day at a time, one policy at a time, one protected person at a time. Because in the end, true power is not destroying those who attack you. It is building something better on the ashes of what they tried to destroy. Comment. As you watch this story unfold, I hope it reminds you of the quiet strength you hold within yourself. Setting a boundary isn't an act of aggression. It is a profound act of self-respect. You have the right to define how you are treated, and that begins with how you value yourself. Keeping a clear head and documenting the truth isn't about preparing for battle, but rather seeking clarity and standing firmly in your reality. True victory isn't just about overcoming a difficult situation, but about how you choose to heal and rebuild afterward. It is about using your experience not to create more conflict, but to foster a kinder, more respectful environment for everyone. Sometimes the most powerful choice we can make is to choose our peace and integrity over the chaos of others. Remember that your worth is not determined by someone else's inability to see it. Take care of yourself, and always know you have the power to write your next chapter with dignity. If you liked it, don't forget to leave a comment and support the channel by subscribing. See you in the upcoming stories.